It was a quiet Thursday evening when Emily heard the sound of tires crunching against her gravel driveway. The autumn wind carried a chill, and the last light of day faded behind the maple trees. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her husband, Daniel, was away on a 3-day business trip. She peered through the curtain and froze. The man stepping out of the black rental car looked achingly familiar, tall, confident, with that same calm, distant expression she remembered. It was Michael, Daniel's oldest friend. The one who had left for London almost 7 years ago without saying goodbye. Her heart skipped. She hadn't thought about him in years, or at least, she told herself that. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. She opened the door slowly. Michael, she said, her voice uncertain. He smiled faintly. Hi Emily, it's been a long time. His tone was steady, but something about his eyes made her uneasy, a quiet weight. Like he'd come carrying the ghosts of the years between them. Daniel's not home, she said, stepping aside. He's in Seattle for work. Michael nodded. I know, he told me. I was hoping to surprise him and maybe catch up with you, too. Emily hesitated, then gestured toward the living room. Come in, it's freezing out there. The fire crackled softly as he stepped inside. The smell of rain lingered on his coat. He looked around, taking in the familiar pictures on the wall. Her and Daniel's wedding photos, the framed postcards from their trips, the small plant on the windowsill she always managed to keep alive. You've made this place feel like home, Michael said quietly. She smiled, unsure how to respond. We've been here almost 6 years now. You missed a lot. He nodded, sitting down on the edge of the couch. I did. There was a pause, long, heavy, but not entirely uncomfortable. Emily poured him some tea, the same chamomile she always offered guests. It felt strangely intimate. Sitting across from him again, he looked tired, older. There was something behind his calm demeanor, something unsaid. What brings you back? She asked finally. He sighed. Work ended sooner than I thought. And honestly, I needed to see some familiar faces. Daniel will be glad, she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Their friendship had faded with time. Phone calls turned to emails, and then silence. Michael nodded but didn't say more. His eyes drifted toward the fire. I should have come back sooner, he murmured. Emily watched him carefully. There was an ache in his words that felt personal, directed not just at the years but at her. After a while, they talked about ordinary things, how Daniel's company had grown, how the town had changed, the old diners that closed, the new families that moved in. It felt normal again, almost easy, until his tone shifted. Do you ever think about the past? He asked softly. Emily blinked. Sometimes. Why? He leaned back, his gaze fixed on her. Because, I do. More often than I should. Her heart tightened. The room seemed smaller now, the air thicker. Michael, she began, unsure how to finish. He gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Forget I said that. It's just the jet lag talking. Emily nodded, though she didn't believe him. As the night deepened, she offered him the guest room. He thanked her and went upstairs quietly. But long after he disappeared down the hall, Emily sat near the fire, staring at the flames flickering across the glass. Something about his presence unsettled her, not in a frightening way, but in a way that pulled at something deep inside her chest. A memory, a question she never asked. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. And for the first time in years, Emily couldn't sleep. When she finally went to bed, she heard footsteps above, slow, measured, like someone pacing in thought. Outside, the wind howled softly against the windows. Inside, two people who had once shared a fleeting, unspoken moment sat awake in different rooms, haunted by what was never said, and as Emily stared into the dark, one thought wouldn't leave her mind. What had Michael come back to say? Morning sunlight filtered through the thin white curtains. Emily woke to the faint sound of movement downstairs, footsteps, clinking dishes, and the low hum of a familiar voice. For a moment, she forgot that Daniel was still away. Then the memory of last night returned. Michael, she slipped on her robe and went downstairs. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Michael stood by the counter, pouring 2 mugs. He looked comfortable, almost as if he'd never left. Morning, he said, turning with a smile. Hope you don't mind. I found the coffee beans in the cabinet. She smiled faintly. You remember where everything is. He chuckled. Some things don't change. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Outside, the world looked peaceful, sunlight bouncing off the dewy grass, a few birds calling from the trees. But inside, there was a strange tension, quiet and unspoken. So, Emily began, How long are you staying in town? A few weeks, he said. I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided. She nodded. Daniel will be home tomorrow. He'll be happy to see you. Michael stirred his coffee slowly. Yeah, I owe him a lot. We used to talk about everything. Used to, Emily echoed. There was a silence. She tried to brush it off, tried to make small talk about the weather, the town, anything but every time their eyes met, she felt that same weight from last night after breakfast. She went about her chores, trying to act natural. Michael offered to help fix the porch railing that had been loose for months. He worked quietly, sleeves rolled up, lost in thought. From the window, Emily watched him. His movements were calm, precise, the same way Daniel used to describe him when they were younger. Reliable, thoughtful, always the one you could depend on. But beneath that calm, she sensed something else. Regret, maybe, or something deeper. Later that afternoon, she brought him a glass of lemonade. He looked up and smiled. Thanks. I was just thinking about old times. Remember that 4th of July party you and Daniel threw? The one with the broken speakers. Emily laughed softly. How could I forget? Everyone had to sing because the music stopped. He smiled. You sang, too. Her cheeks warmed. Barely. You sang beautifully, he said. His tone was quiet but steady, almost reverent. The moment stretched. Emily didn't know what to say. She looked away first, pretending to focus on the garden. They talked more after that, carefully, gently. It felt like walking on thin glass. By evening, the sky turned soft shades of pink and gold. Michael offered to cook dinner. The way he moved around the kitchen made her heart ache. It reminded her of a version of life that could have been, if choices long ago had gone differently. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Neither spoke for a while. The world felt still. Then Michael broke the silence. Do you ever wonder how things might have turned out, if we hadn't all gone our separate ways? Emily turned to him. You mean you and Daniel? He hesitated. I mean all of us. The words lingered in the air. She looked away, her breath catching. I don't think about that, she said quietly. But she did. She had, many times, back then, before Daniel and she were even serious. There had been a spark between her and Michael, small, fleeting, but real. He had left before anything ever came of it, and she had convinced herself it was nothing. Now, years later, that spark felt dangerously close to returning. Michael, she said gently, whatever you're trying to say, please don't. He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought it up. They sat in silence again, the tension slowly melting into something like sadness. When night fell, Michael stood. I'll turn in. Long day. Emily forced a smile. Good night, Michael. He hesitated before going inside. Good night, Emily. She stayed on the porch long after he was gone, staring at the stars. The air felt heavy, full of questions she didn't want to answer. Inside the house, Michael stood by the guest room window, looking out at the same night sky. He pulled something from his pocket, an old photograph. Worn at the edges, it was a picture from years ago, the three of them laughing at a picnic. But in the photo, his eyes weren't on the camera, they were on Emily, and the quiet truth in that image said everything he'd never dared to speak aloud. The next morning arrived with a soft drizzle. Rain tapped gently against the kitchen window as Emily prepared breakfast. She moved quietly, almost mechanically, trying to focus on the sound of the rain instead of the thoughts spinning in her mind. Michael came downstairs. Still in his gray sweater, his hair damp from a shower. Morning, he said with a half smile. She returned it politely. Morning. Coffee's ready. They sat in silence for a while, sipping from their mugs. The air between them felt thick, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Emily finally broke it. Daniel called last night. His flight lands at 6 tomorrow evening. Michael nodded. That's good. He looked down at his coffee, tracing the rim with his thumb. I'm glad. I want to see him. Tell him everything. Everything? She repeated carefully. He met her eyes. About London. About what happened. About why I really left. She frowned. You mean work? He hesitated, then shook his head. Not just work. Her chest tightened. She didn't ask, but the look in his eyes told her it wasn't just about business or career. There was something personal, something that still tied him to this house. This town, this moment. Later that day, they drove into town to pick up groceries. The streets glistened from the rain. Inside the small market, familiar faces greeted them, old neighbors, the cashier who remembered their names. It almost felt normal again. But Emily noticed the way people looked at them. Curious, warm smiles, harmless chatter. Oh, So good to see Michael back, they said. How long's it been? 7 years. She smiled politely, but her thoughts were elsewhere. When they got home, she tried to distract herself by cleaning, rearranging the living room, folding laundry, anything to keep her mind off the quiet pull between them. Michael offered to help hang a new picture frame. He stood beside her, close enough for her to feel his presence. As he reached up, she caught the faint scent of his cologne, clean, familiar, dangerously nostalgic. Their hands brushed as they straightened the frame. Neither moved. For a second, time stilled, then Michael stepped back, clearing his throat. Sorry, he said softly. It's fine, she replied quickly, but her voice trembled just a little. That night, they had dinner together again, roasted vegetables and pasta, simple and quiet. Emily tried to keep the conversation light, but Michael's mood seemed distant, heavier than before. Halfway through the meal, he spoke suddenly. Emily, do you remember the night before I left? Her fork froze midair. Of course I do. You said goodbye at the airport. You told us you'd be back soon. He shook his head. Not that night. The night before that. She frowned, confused. What about it? He looked at her, really looked. I almost told you something that night, but Daniel walked in before I could. Her pulse quickened. Michael, please, he cut her off gently. I just need to say this once. You don't have to respond. I've carried it for too long. Emily's throat went dry. The room felt smaller. The sound of rain outside muffled everything else. I left, he said slowly, because I fell in love with you, and I didn't know how to live with that. Not when you were marrying my best friend. The words hung in the air, quiet, steady, unshakable. Emily couldn't breathe. She stared at him, heart pounding. Michael, you can't, I know, he said quickly. I know it's wrong. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know. That's all. She looked away, eyes glistening. You should have never told me this. I tried not to, he said softly, but being here, seeing you again, it all came back. Silence filled the room. Only the rain spoke. After what felt like forever, Emily stood. You should go for a walk. Get some air. Michael nodded. Yeah, maybe I should. He left without another word. The door closed quietly behind him. Emily sat back down at the table, staring at the 2 plates, the untouched food, the empty chair across from her. She didn't cry. She just sat there, feeling the storm settle inside her chest. When Michael returned an hour later, drenched and silent, they didn't speak. He went straight to his room. That night, Emily lay awake listening to the rain against the window. Her heart ached, not out of love, but out of confusion. She still loved her husband. She was sure of that, but part of her, the part she thought had long since gone quiet, stirred again by the time she finally drifted to sleep. Dawn was already touching the edges of the sky, and in the guest room, Michael sat by the window once more, watching the first light break through the rain, knowing he had said too much, yet somehow, not enough. The next evening, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway just as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Emily stood at the window, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. Michael was upstairs, his suitcase half-packed, his expression unreadable. She stepped outside as Daniel climbed out, smiling as always. Hey sweetheart, he said, wrapping her in a hug. The familiar scent of his cologne made her chest tighten. Missed you. I missed you too, she whispered, holding on a moment longer than usual. When he pulled back, he glanced at the car by the garage. Who's here? Emily hesitated. Michael. He came back from London. He's been staying here the last few days. Daniel's eyes lit up. You're kidding. He laughed and headed toward the door. I can't believe it's been years. Michael came down the stairs just as Daniel entered. The 2 men stared for a second, and then Daniel broke into a grin, pulling him into a hug. Man, look at you. It's been forever. Michael smiled, but it was faint. Yeah, it's good to see you, Daniel. For a few minutes, the house felt alive again. Laughter, old stories, the sound of 2 old friends catching up. Emily stayed quiet, forcing a smile when Daniel looked her way, but she felt something twisting inside her. Dinner that night was loud, warm, and almost normal. Daniel asked about London, about the work Michael had done overseas. Michael answered politely, skirting the deeper truths. Emily watched him carefully, catching the subtle changes in his tone, the way his gaze occasionally drifted her way and then quickly away again. After dinner, Daniel opened a bottle of wine. The conversation grew easier. They talked about the past, old camping trips, late-night drives, all the things they'd done when life still felt young. At one point, Daniel said with a grin, You know, Emily always said you were the calmest person she ever met. I don't think I've ever seen you angry. Michael smiled faintly. I've learned to hide it well. Emily's stomach nodded later. When Daniel went upstairs to unpack, Michael stood near the fireplace, staring at the photos on the mantel. Emily joined him, her voice barely above a whisper. You're leaving tomorrow. He nodded. Yes, I think it's better that way. She swallowed hard. Good. But her voice cracked on the word, betraying her calm. Michael turned to her. I meant what I said, Emily. But I'm not here to ruin anything. You and Daniel have a good life. I don't belong in it. She nodded, her eyes burning. You shouldn't have told me. You should have just let it stay in the past. He looked down. Maybe. But sometimes silence becomes its own kind of lie. She didn't answer. She couldn't. A long moment passed before Daniel's voice carried down the stairs. Hey, you two. We should all go out tomorrow morning before Michael leaves breakfast at the diner. Emily quickly stepped back. That sounds nice, she called out, forcing cheer into her tone. Michael smiled softly. I'll be ready. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Emily lay beside Daniel, listening to his even breathing. Her mind spun between guilt and longing, between what was real and what could never be. Near midnight, she quietly got up and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the moon through the window. And there he was, Michael, standing near the back door, fully dressed, a small duffel bag at his feet. You're leaving now, she whispered. He nodded. It's easier this way. No long goodbyes. Emily took a step closer. Daniel will be hurt. I know, he said softly, but it's better than staying and saying more than I should. She stared at him, the man who had once been her husband's best friend. The man who had just confessed something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. He looked at her one last time. You don't have to say anything. Just, remember me kindly. Michael, she started, but her voice broke. He smiled sadly. Take care of him, Emily. He's a good man. Before she could speak again, he turned and stepped into the cold night air. The door closed gently behind him. Emily stood there, tears slipping down her cheeks, unsure whether she was crying for him, for herself, or for the silence they both would carry forever. When Daniel came down in the morning, the guest room was empty, the bed neatly made, the keys left on the table. Guess he left early, Daniel said, yawning. He always did hate goodbyes. Emily forced a small smile. Yeah, he did. But inside, her heart whispered something else, that his goodbye wasn't just an ending. It was a confession that would never fade. The days that followed felt oddly quiet. Daniel went back to work, and the house returned to its familiar rhythm, morning coffee, evening walks, simple routines that had always grounded Emily. But now, even the silence carried an echo. Michael's absence lingered like a shadow, the faint smell of his cologne on the guest room pillow, the empty space at the dining table, the memories she tried not to replay. Every small reminder tugged at her chest. One afternoon, while dusting the shelf near the fireplace, she found something tucked behind the photo frames, an envelope, folded neatly, her name written across it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short note in Michael's handwriting. Emily, I meant every word I said, but I never wanted those words to hurt you. Sometimes, loving someone means walking away before you cause damage that can't be undone. You and Daniel deserve peace, and I need to find mine somewhere far from here. Thank you for being the reason I once believed in something good, Michael. Her breath caught. She folded the letter carefully, tears slipping down her face. It wasn't a love letter, not really. It was a goodbye soaked in truth, the kind of truth that didn't fade, even when spoken too late. That evening, Daniel came home early. He found her sitting by the window, staring at the letter in her lap. What's that? He asked. She hesitated. Just something Michael left behind. Daniel sighed softly. He always was a strange one. Said goodbye without saying goodbye. Emily smiled faintly, trying to mask the ache inside. Yeah, that sounds like him. Daniel sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. He'll come back someday. You'll see. Maybe for the holidays. She nodded, though deep down she knew he wouldn't. That night, Emily dreamed of a summer long ago. The three of them at a lake, laughter echoing through the warm air. She remembered Michael looking at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the same quiet expression he'd worn the last time they spoke. When she woke, the dream lingered like the fading scent of rain. Weeks passed. Life carried on. Daniel never asked more about Michael's sudden departure, and Emily never mentioned the letter again. She placed it gently in the back of a drawer, beneath old photographs, hidden, but not forgotten. Sometimes, when the evenings grew long and the world fell still, she'd sit by the window and think about what might have been if life had turned 1 degree differently, not with regret, but with something softer. Understanding, because in the end, love doesn't always arrive to stay. Sometimes, it comes only to remind you of what your heart is capable of, and then leaves you changed. One chilly afternoon in early December, a small postcard arrived from London. No return address, just a single sentence written in the same familiar hand. "I hope you're both happy, truly happy." Emily read it quietly, then smiled through her tears. She tucked it beside the letter in the drawer, closed it gently, and exhaled. That night, she made dinner for Daniel. The two of them talking and laughing like old times. Outside, the wind brushed softly through the trees, and somewhere far away, a man walked through the streets of a foreign city, finally learning to let go. But Emily would never forget his words or the weight of the silence they left behind.